Hello there, and welcome to Gentleman Spaceman's Atomic Hideout. I'm your host and producer, Brad Grahowski, and today we're going to try something a little bit different. I am a voice actor and an audiobook narrator, and normally when we're producing an audiobook, we work really hard to make it perfect with editing and software just to get everything just right, sounding right, and meeting all of the specifications of Audible. But I'm not going to do any of that today. I want to call this, let's say, real-time read-aloud. How about that? The Atomic Hideout real-time read-aloud. And I'm going to narrate a science fiction story that I've never read before. So you're going to be hearing it for the first time with me. Haven't done any prep for it or anything like that. I have no idea what it's even about. I know the title, the author, that's it. And I'm just going to read through it and maybe stop and comment on things as I go or share things that I think. And I don't know. This could be a fun way to sort of get an inside view into what an audiobook narrator does, or it may end up being completely catastrophic and boring. But I think it's going to be fun. And if you really prefer to hear, a finished product, we're presenting a lot of those here at the Atomic Hideout as well. So that might be more, if that's more your speed, we got it for you. But I think this could be fun. It's just as a different way to sort of experience science fiction from the golden age and beyond. Our story today is called From Outer Space by Robert Zacks. And if I'm not looking at you at the camera or you as I'm reading, that's because I've got my script down here and I've got my microphone here. It's a shotgun mic, so you don't see it in front of my face like you might be used to with podcasters and whatnot. So that's kind of the setup here. So if I'm not looking at you, it's because I'm looking at the script of the book. So let's give this a go and see how it works. I'm kind of excited to find out. All right, here we go. From Outer Space by Robert Zacks. That was fine. I'm going to try that again. Ready? From Outer Space, written by Robert Zacks, narrated by Brad Grahowski. All right, here we go. The grizzled old space veteran leaned back in his chair and stared up through the transparent dome. In the black sky, myriad white specks gleamed without twinkling, their light unbent by atmosphere or dust. Okay, well, this is good setting it up. The steady pulse of the The steady pulse of the air makers kept rhythm with the heartbeats of the young men seated in a semicircle, listening with glistening eyes to these ancient tales of an Earth they'd never seen, the home of their species. I do think I did read this. Okay, yeah, let me back up. I don't know for sure. This might be a story that I've read. We'll find out. If so, it's a good ending. They stared hungrily at the old man's face. There was a silvery spot on the chin where Venusian fungus had nearly gotten into his bloodstream and had to be burned away. Over one eye, an eyebrow was gone, replaced by scar tissue grown on a planet at the other end of the galaxy, where the light of enormous fireflies wasn't cold. Try that again. Ran out of gas in the tank. The other end of the galaxy, where the light of enormous fireflies wasn't cold, where the light of enormous fireflies wasn't cold as on ancient Earth, but searing with heat. Imagine, they marveled, such weak flame in fireflies. I'll try a different voice for that, because I think these are the people watching. And it says... It doesn't say anything about them. Imagine, they marveled, such weak flame in fireflies. Not weak, corrected the old man. Just different. Those insects on Earth didn't have to fight off intense cold. They had a much thicker atmosphere and were close to the sun. And they didn't feed on alcohol. The young men's eyes glittered. They were an odd group, small, most of them, none over 5 feet 6 inches, and pale, unlike the old man who was bulky around the shoulders and had skin virtually leathered by various radiations and temperature winds. Each day this group waited hungrily for the old man to come and talk to them. The stories he told were the breath of life to them, and of all the tales of adventure in the far ends of the universe, the one that was most repeatedly called for was the story of what had happened to Earth. Yeah, I think I have read this one, but it was years ago. What had happened to Earth? "Tell us about Earth," said one of them, now in a low voice. Try that again. "Tell us about Earth," said one of them now in a low voice. "About how great we were," said the old man. No, he's asking the question. "About how great we were," said the old man. "About what love was like. About homes and children, and how a man went to work in the morning at tasks of his own choosing. Or, no, about what happened, at the finish." The old man looked up again. His eyes were dreamy. "Earth." "Earth?" Try again. "Earth," he said softly. "Earth. I've been through the galaxy these last 40 years, and I've seen planets by the thousands, and there never was one like Earth." "Tell us," they said, each in urgent, differing words, but all with the same tortured look. "Tell us about what went wrong." "I've told you that 100 times, he said. But they wanted it again, like a man who relives an incident to examine each moment with incredulity, as if in hope that it will fade and not have happened, as if in unconscious attempt to move sideways from that point into another time stream probability, where a different course of action will be true. "All right," said the old man. Then there's a little break. The first they had heard of the strangers from outer space was when the new ultra-shortwave frequencies were used. Professor Kennicott of Palmyra University was the first to find how to generate and control them. He tried to transform the wavelengths upward to a range either auditory or visual, but for some reason power was lost in the process. Apparently he gave them a sufficient jolt with extra voltage, however, because they were picked up by the strangers in outer space. Let me try that one again. Apparently he gave them a sufficient jolt with extra voltage. However, because they were picked up by the strangers in outer space. I still got it wrong. Apparently he gave them a sufficient jolt with extra voltage, however, because they were picked up by the strangers in outer space as a signal. The heaviside layer did not stop these wavelengths. Professor Kennicott was startled one day when he heard, or thought he heard, a soundless voice in his mind. It said, "Interesting. We didn't know there was life on your planet, or in your solar system." Professor Kennicott shook his head. And looked around. Nobody was in the laboratory. "Of course," said the voice. "We detected atomic radiations from the area, but Zetal thought it might come from your sun. Tell us, please, are you a grade 3 society?" "My God," muttered Professor Kennicott. "I'm having hallucinations." "There seems to be some difficulty establishing our telepathic communication," came the puzzled thought, and then after a pause. Could it be we're in communication with creatures of 0 grade? Another thought from elsewhere answered, and yet Professor Kennicott somewhat was tuned in. Impossible. The signal picked up was very close to telepathic frequency. It wasn't until 2 days later. Let me give that a little breath after that, a little pause, a little room to breathe. The signal picked up was very close to telepathic frequency. It wasn't until 2 days later that Professor Kennicott discovered that he wasn't the only one who had experienced the auditory hallucinations. The entire college was bubbling about how Professor Johnson had come running out of the chemistry lab, which was 2 doors away from physics, holding his head and babbling nonsense. Professor Kennicott made a beeline for the hospital and had a quiet discussion with Professor Johnson, a discussion which is now historic. They discovered that not only were both their IQs over 180, but that both of them, sitting together discussing the matter, were simultaneously getting new messages which nobody around them was receiving. It wasn't long after that, of course, that many of the most brilliant men on Earth were reporting the same hallucinations, and as news of it spread, it became obvious that not all could be insane or exactly the same way with the same thoughts. Excitement and puzzlement ran tremendously high, because although these intellects of Earth could receive telepathic messages, they were not advanced enough to send. They only knew what was being messaged to them, and this continued to be so until feverishly working physicists pinned down the telepathic wavelength mechanically. That was when conversations were begun, and the entire Earth was able to listen in. By translation and regular broadcast. The discussions did not go well. The beings from outer space would not answer questions, they only asked. The first thing, apparently, that made them cautious was the first official question from Earth. How is it that we understand your thought even though many of our scientists speak different languages? Come on, guys. Your question indicates you may be a low grade of developed life. We shall investigate and fit you into our needs according to your capacities. Nope. According to your capabilities. A thrill of horror went around the world. I can imagine. What kind of monsters were these? What would they do? The uproar that ensued was full of frantic military preparations. Bombs were readied in the atomic planes. Rockets were raised in the cradles. No. Rockets were raised in their cradles adjustable to any orbit. Unfortunately, nobody thought to conceal this, and some fool had failed to shut off the telepathic wavelength. One morning the world awoke to a non-electrical society in which nothing electrical would work. We have put a field of force around your planet, came the message. There must be no violence. Be not afraid. We come as friends. We will appear now and investigate. Be calm. The leaders of each nation spoke to their people, and the world waited in tense silence. One day, an enormous sphere appeared and landed. The creatures that emerged couldn't be clearly discerned because they were in spacesuits, which gave them comfortable air pressures. And what was to them breathable atmosphere. They were 4-legged creatures, but could walk on 2 if necessary. A delegation of picked dignitaries started to show them our world. A delegation of picked dignitaries started to show them our world, our customs, the way we dressed, what we lived in, what we ate. Almost immediately, the strangers turned and left our world. Within 2 days, Earth was in bondage. okay. All right, there's another pause here. The old space veteran stopped. He looked around at the tense faces. "We found out later," he said. "It was the banquet they watched on a film which we ran off that did it. There was a scene where a waiter brings in a whole roast pig with an apple in its mouth, and then it's eaten." All the boys drew a deep, horrified breath. The old man nodded heavily. "Well," he said, "how were we to know these beings from outer space had evolved from pigs, or creatures very similar?" He sighed and stood up. "Well, maybe in 50 years they'll feel we're advanced enough for freedom," he smiled. "I'll leave you to your telepathy classes and conditioning." He moved toward the door, and a portion of glass wall slid aside to let them through. But before he exited, he turned and said softly, "Now, don't let it get by you, boys. Being exhibited in a zoo isn't too awful. Serve your time, and you'll get servant status like me and get out into space." He waved and walked out through the spectators gathered around the glass cage. They moved aside to let them through, staring at him with brilliant brown eyes, their snout-like noses twitching in sympathy and kindness, their pig-like faces gentle, with the expression a man gives a trained dog. Oh, that was fun. That was short, and it was the one I thought it was. I had actually read this a couple of years ago. I may have actually narrated this for the podcast. I don't remember. Once again, that was From Outer Space, written by Robert Zacks, narrated by me, Brad Grahowski. It looks like this was originally produced or published in May of 1952. I don't always get that information. I don't really know anything more about it, other than it was by Robert Zacks. And it's a fun little story. I kind of like it. I like a good twist at the end. I like something unexpected, right? And it was fun. Well, this was our very first, what did I call it? Read aloud, real-time read aloud. And I hope you enjoy it. This was super fun for me, and I'd like to do it again. If you enjoyed this and think it's something that we should do again in the future, please leave a note in the comments letting us know that, because that would be great. As always, remember to subscribe, click the bell, and like, and do all that stuff, because we're really trying to build an audience here. Trying to bring together as many sci-fi lovers as we can to sort of share the past of science fiction from the atomic age and beyond. Thanks so much. Once again, I'm your host, Brad Grahowski, and this has been Gentleman Spaceman's Atomic Hideout, real-time read-along. Adios, amigos. No. Journey well among the stars.